Welcome to the Sikha this week, Project Look at the Sikhis. We're going to be learning this week Sikha Beis of Parshas Boy and Chelek Yud Aleph. It's on page 42. Mea Pasuk v'chol b'choyer Adam b'vanecha tifta. Should be Parsha Seinu. This week's Parsha, the mitzvah of Pidyon Ben. L'meidim b'Yerushalmi, the Yerushalmi learns out from this. In addition to the obligation a father has to redeem his son, the mitzvah of Pidyon Ben, as we'll see, and this is the main thing that the Sikha discusses, that the father is the one that has the obligation to redeem his son when he's 30 days old. That in addition to this, we learn out from this pasuk, if a father did not redeem his son, Chayiv haben liftes esatzmai. The son is obligated to redeem himself. When he's older, when he's above bar mitzvah, when he's able to redeem himself. We learn this from this that it says Adam. Adam. That extra word teaches me that every individual is obligated to redeem himself when he can, if his father didn't redeem him. Omnam bebavli lameidim dinzeh ma pasuk podei tifta goyma hanema beparshas kairach. In the Bavli, the same halacha is learned out from a different pasuk. From the fact that the Torah writes the double expression of podei tifta in Parshas Kairach, where the Torah discusses there all of the details of the Chav Dalet Matnas Kahuna. One of them is Pidyon Ben. So from there you learn out that a person, a B'chayr, is obligated to redeem himself if his father did not redeem him when he's older. So v'tzarech lahaven. The question here is, Aleph, Mai beinayu me'eze pasuk yalfinon she'im lo padei aviv chayev liftei tzatzmai. What is the difference from which pasuk we learned this out? This halacha, that if he didn't redeem himself, his father is obligated to redeem him. What is the difference between these two limudim? Beis, another question is, Mai taime bebavli nilmadu ma pasuk padei tifta. Why does the Bavli learn it out from the pasuk of padei tifta? Or b'Yerushalmi ma pasuk shebe Parsha Seinu. And Yerushalmi chooses to learn it out from the pasuk in this week's parsha. There has to be a specific reason based on their general approach to the understanding of the mitzvah of who is obligated in Pidyon Ben, as the Rabbi will explain, that leads them to the different opinions here of the source from where we learn out that each individual has to do the Pidyon Ben for himself. Each b'chayr, that is, has to do the Pidyon Ben for himself. So to get to this, there's going to be a pretty lengthy introduction here. This is also, as you can see, a hadrin on Masechta Psachim. The Rebbe will bring here a few details first regarding these two limudim, and then go to the hadrin on Masechta Psachim, and then later on we're going to get back to answering the difference between the Bavli and the Yerushalmi. But first, let's look a little bit closer at these two limudim here. V'hinei yesh heferish b'toichin u'be'inyin b'natzivish al-pidyon ben amer b'parshas Seinu. There's a difference between the mitzvah of Pidyon Ben as it's written in this week's parsha and the way it's recorded in Parshas Kairach. Aleph, the first difference is beParshas Seinu ne'amar v'chol b'choyer Adam b'vanecha tifta v'chol b'choyer bona yefta. So here in this week's parsha it emphasizes the fact that you're redeeming your son. Before Rishba, so here the Torah is telling you Sha'av. It's the obligation of the father to redeem his son. In Parshas Kairach, the pasuk just simply says, "Ach podei tifta es b'chayr ha'adam." A b'chayr should be redeemed. It doesn't point out anything about the father's obligation for a son. Beis, another distinction, beParshas Seinu ba tzivi behemshech la'inyin d'tzias Mitzrayim v'hu atam l'tzivi zeh. In our parsha, it comes continuing from the story of Yitzias Mitzrayim, and this is also the reason for this mitzvah. Because Vayihi ki hiksha paril shalcheinu vayareg Hashem kol b'choy b'eretz Mitzrayim, and then al kain kol b'chonim b'choy b'nei yefta. Because of the fact that the Eibishter saved all the Yidden, the b'choyrim, at the time of Makas b'choyris, therefore, you have the mitzvah of Pidyon Ben. That's in this week's parsha. The Parshas Kairach, Nema Pidyon Ben, the Parshas Matnas Kahuna, in Parshas Kairach, the mitzvah of Pidyon Ben is written as one of the Matnas Kahuna. Or by Safas Pratim, there's some additional details that the Torah lets us know there. Mi ben Chaydish, that the child has to be redeemed from a month old. Chamesh is Shkolim, that the amount is 5 Shkolim. So over there it's a different context. It's talking about the Matnas Kahuna. So now that we see these differences, we can say, the difference in the source, that if a father did not redeem his son, that he's obligated to redeem himself. So we can see it based on the difference in the context of what these psukim are about in these two parshas. First, let's take a look at what it says at the end of Masechta Psachim, where it discusses a detail in the mitzvah of Pidyon HaBen. B'soif Masechta Psachim Misa. In the end of Masechta Psachim, the Gemara says as follows: Rab Simloi ikla lepidyon HaBen. Rab Simloi attended a Pidyon HaBen. Bo minei. So they asked him the question. Pshita, it's obvious. Al Pidyon HaBen asher k'shanu b'mitzvah v'tzivanu al Pidyon HaBen avi HaBen mevarach. On the mitzvah itself, the bracha that you make, al Pidyon HaBen for the mitzvah, who makes that bracha? The father. Now the question was, Baruch Shechayanu v'kimonu v'giyanu l'zman hazeh, the bracha of Shechayanu, who makes this bracha? Kayim mevarach, or avi HaBen mevarach? The Kayim makes this bracha, or the father of the son that's redeeming his son makes this bracha? And the Gemara explains the two sides to this question. Kayim mevarach, is the Kayim the one that makes the bracha? The kamati anali yadei, he's the one that's receiving the benefit. He's getting the 5 coins, the 5 silver shkalim. Or perhaps the father of the son makes the bracha, the ka'avid mitzvah. He's the one that's performing the mitzvah here. It's his mitzvah to redeem his son, so he should make the bracha shechayanu on the opportunity to do this mitzvah. Loi have biyadei. Rab Simloi did not have the answer. Oster shal be midrashe, he came to the bis medrash to ask this question. Omrulei, they told Rab Simloi, avi HaBen mevarach shtayim, the father of the son makes both brachas, al Pidyon HaBen and shechayanu, v'hilchase avi HaBen mevarach shtayim. And this is the halacha that the father makes both brachas. So this is the conclusion of Masechta Psachim. V'tzarach lahaven. So we need to understand there in this Gemara as follows. Harei aboye kayim mevarach avi HaBen mevarach. The question regarding Shechayanu, whether the Kohen makes the bracha or the father makes the bracha, Hirak ben Agela berchas Shechayanu. So Umam Makim la Agdama, or the Milsa, the Pshita. So what is the introduction? And something which is quite obvious. Pshita al Pidyon HaBen chulu avi HaBen mevarach. That it's obvious that on that bracha, the father makes the bracha. If that's obvious, and that's not a question, so there's no reason for this introduction to the question of Shechayanu. Why does the Gemara give this introduction? So v'hine koshizu hiksher b'tzlach. The tzlach asks this question, metaretz, and he answers as follows: Da kavona b'zela hadgish she'aboye b'bircha shechayanu ba mitzad adiyek b'nusach habracha shel Pidyon HaBen. It's only based on looking at the precise wording of the bracha of Pidyon HaBen. If you look at exactly the nusach of that bracha, that's the reason why we have a suffix regarding shechayanu. He explains it in 2 ways. Aleph, number 1, Mizeh shemevarchim al Pidyon HaBen. The bracha is, thank the Eibishter for al Pidyon HaBen, using the term al. V'loi liftais, not liftais haben. So you look at birchas ha-mitzvahs b'chlal. There are some mitzvahs that you say al, and there's some that you say le. So over here, the nusach is al. What's the reason? Muchach, from this it's clear, she'ef sheliftais gam al yidei shliach. That the Pidyon HaBen could be done through a shliach. The father himself doesn't have to do it. He could appoint a shliach to do this. This is based on the Rosh, as the Rabbi points here in Order 12, that regarding all the mitzvahs, one of the opinions in the Rishonim is the distinction between the nusach of al and le is based on whether it's a mitzvah that could be fulfilled with a shliach. If it could, then you say al. But if you could only do it yourself, so then you say le, indicating that livdais, that I have that obligation to do this very action. So over here, the nusach is al. So the father could appoint a shliach. So that's the basis of our question here. Mi mevarech birchas shechayanu. Who should make the bracha of shechayanu? Avi HaBen mevarech isa. Is it the father that makes this bracha? Afal pi shemipnei zeh tevutal lefa'amim bracha zu. Sometimes he will not be making this bracha. No one will be making this bracha. When? Hainu ba'asais shliach liftis es benai. If he appoints a shliach to redeem his son, so then the father is not making the bracha. the shliach, it's not his mitzvah, is not going to make the bracha. The kohen won't make the bracha. So in that scenario, no one will be making the shechayanu. Yet the father does make the bracha when he's doing the mitzvah. It's his mitzvah. He's doing. He's performing, fulfilling his mitzvah. Or this reason, since if you appoint a shliach, there'll be no bracha here. No one will make this shechayanu. So that leads us to the conclusion that it's better that the kohen should make the bracha. Sha'az mevarech b'chol pidyin ma'achar the kamati ano liyadei b'chol pam. And then we'll institute that it's the kohen that always makes the bracha by every pidyin aben. He's the one that's getting a benefit here, and he's making the bracha of shechayanu for that hana that he's receiving in this mitzvah. That's the basis of the question that comes out from seeing the nusach of al pidyin aben. That's one way he explains it. Beis, another way of explaining it, similar. Hanusach al pidyin aben, the word of al pidyin aben, mechiach, proves she'ein mitzvahs hapidyin nasas v'nigmeres al-yedei avi ben l'chod. This is not a mitzvah that is completed with the father of the son that has this obligation alone. Kiyim b'siyua koyin shemekabel hapidyin. He could only fulfill the mitzvah with the assistance of the koyin. The koyin has to receive the money in order for the redemption of his son to be complete. So this is another opinion that the Rebbe is bringing from the Rivash, as he points in Order 14, another opinion of the word al. Al refers to a mitzvah that you can't complete alone, you have to do it with someone else. So that's the basis of the question. Who makes the bracha? Kivin shal yidei shneim nasas ha-mitzvah. This is a mitzvah that's performed through the participation of both of them. And besides that, the kohen also gets a hana in this mitzvah, so perhaps he should make the bracha of shechiyanu. So according to both of these pshatim, the tzlach is saying that it's the word al in the nusach of the bracha pidyin aben that leads to the question regarding shechiyanu. Aval says the Rebbe as follows: Yisoid pirush zeh. The basis of this explanation, sha'asafik shalaboy minei einei elam b'diya kaloshin al. It's only because of this one word in the nusach of the bracha al pidyin aben einoi misyashiv kol kach besignan v'hemshach inyan b'gemara. Is not fit well into the words of the Gemara itself as it's there, as we see in the continuation of the words in the Gemara. And for a few reasons. Aleph, number one, mehanigud, from the contrast. The Gemara says, pshit, it's obvious that the bracha pidyin aben, who makes the bracha, the father. Then, baruch, chulu, kayim mevarech, oyavi, haben chulu. Then we have the question regarding shechayanu, who makes the bracha, the kayin or the father. So, from this contrast, mashma, da pshituse, hi ba'oisa hanoise, shaboya boya, hamavarech. The bracha of pidyin aben, it's obvious, it's simple, that he makes the bracha, and the reason it's obvious he makes the bracha, it's his mitzvah. And now the question is regarding the bracha of shechayanu, who makes that bracha. So it's a contrast in the same inyan over here, of who's the one that makes the bracha. Because it's obvious that the father that has the mitzvah makes the bracha, so that's what brings us to the ibaya of whether he should make the shechayanu or not. However, according to the tzlach, it's not related in that way at all. According to the tzlach, it's just the fact that the nusach of the bracha of al indicates this detail, whether it can be done through a shliach, or that it has the participation of the kohen. So it's really a side point. It's the point about the al that is the basis of the question, not in the flow like we see it in the Gemara, pshita, oi, that it's the pshita that over here he makes the bracha, and that brings us over here the question regarding the bracha of shechayanu. Beis, another point here is im ikarat gosha huloi bezeh de pshita shaha'avu ma'ahu mavarech ala pidyin ala benusach habracha. If the whole emphasis in the Gemara is not about the fact that it's the father that makes that bracha, so now we have a question: does he make the next bracha? But rather ala benusach habracha. The only thing that we're bringing the bracha of pidyin aben is because of this nusach of the word al. And Cain, if so, it should have been written in the Gemara in the opposite, so you would see what the main emphasis here is. It's obvious that the father makes the bracha al pidyin aben, So over here, in this, if you write it in this way, so you would see that you're focusing on the nusach of al pidyon haben. But not the way the Gemara says it. Pshita al pidyon haben, ambi haben, hu amavarech. It's obvious, this bracha. Who makes this bracha? The father. So the way it's written by us, it's the mashma, the leinachsi l'daik ba bracha. We're not looking at the precise wording of the bracha. Elami hu hamavarech. The bracha, what we're looking at in this bracha is who is the one that makes the bracha. And because it's obvious that the father makes the bracha pidyon haben, that's the reason why we have a suffix regarding the shechayanu. But we're not looking at the word of al at all. It's not mashma like that in the Gemara. Gimel, besides all of this, according to the Pshat of Tzlach, Havale lemeima bekitzer. The Gemara should have just said very concisely, Kivin dal pidyon haben mevarach al pidyon haben. So now barach shechayanu chulu kayim mevarach chulu. So since the bracha there is al pidyon haben, so now the question is regarding shechayanu. In other words, in the pshita, there's no reason to bring up the whole inyan of that the father makes the bracha. None of that. Just it's the word al pidyon haben. So the Gemara should have just said al pidyon haben. That's one bracha. Now the question is, what's with shechayanu? The whole question is based on the al pidyon haben. V'imkein hadra kushya leduchta. This brings us back to our original question. Matam la'agdome sha'avi avem bevarach al pidyon haben. What's the reason for the introduction of the Gemara that the father makes the bracha al pidyon haben? So that's the basic question of the Sikha that the Rebbe will explain. We could also ask in the conclusion of this subject, the very last words of the Masechta, the way they explained it to Rab Samloi was that the father makes both brachas. Is it necessary for the Gemara to count it for me? Why is the Gemara giving me that number? And also the question is, we didn't even have a question about both brachas. We only had a question about the shechayanu. That should have been the answer of the Gemara. That regarding shechayanu, the father makes the bracha. Why is it even mentioning the other bracha, both together, shtayim? There's no question about the other bracha. So this is a similar question to the previous question. We see in the Gemara, both in the question and in the answer, that shechayanu and the bracha al pidyon haben that the father makes are related to each other. So what's the connection between them? There's another question here. What's the connection of this subject of pidyon haben to the conclusion of Masechta Pesachim? The Rashbam says, Mishum da'ayri masnisim b'shnei minei brachas ba'adam echad u'maisa echad hatoli zeh b'zeh. Since before this, the Gemara was discussing two brachas by one person with one's inyan, and that are dependent on each other. What was that? Kagam Pesach b'zevach, Chagiga ba'am Pesach was discussing the bracha of the Korban Pesach and the Korban Chagiga that comes together with the Korban Pesach. So therefore, so he brings over here another question regarding two brachas, saying that these two brachas go together and that the father makes both brachas. So it's sort of not really related, but it's just another example of two brachas. We can say this regarding the Gemara. The Gemara does this many times. The question still remains regarding the Rif and the Rosh. They also bring this halacha in Masechta Pesachim. V'dar kam heim haloi hu shema'asvim piskei halachas mishas lo'isim Masechta she'oska b'din zeh. So v'leihoyalem lahavia ela b'Masechta b'chayris l'chudah. Their style is that they bring the halachas, they collect halachas from other places in Shas and insert it into that Masechta where those halachas are relevant, that are connected to the theme of that Masechta. So over here, this detail about pidyon haben, they should have brought in Masechta B'chayris, not over here at the conclusion of Masechta Pesachim. Elavadai shedin anal b'pidyon haben yesh l'shayches miyuchedes l'Masechta Pesachim. So it has to have a unique connection to Masechta Pesachim, that not only the Gemara brings it here, but even the Rif and the Rosh as well bring it here at the conclusion of Masechta Pesachim. So, va'abir b'chol zeh. So to explain all of this is as follows. Ha-mitzvah, the Pidyon HaBen, nasas al yedei shloisha mishtatfen. The mitzvah of Pidyon HaBen has three participants. Avi HaBen, hapoides benoi, the father redeeming his son. HaBen hanifte, the child, the baby that's being redeemed. Va'akayin hamakabot mea Pidyon, and the kayin receiving the money that will then bring about the redemption of this child. So v'hinei ishtat v'sakayin b'zeh shemakabot mea Pidyon. The participation of the kayin when he receives the money by the zen nifta b'chayr, and this brings the pidyon of the b'chayr. Ein in yana she'olav hutal achiyuv liftas b'chayr miYisrael. So it's obvious he has no obligation to see to it that this yid is going to be redeemed. It's a part or a condition of this mitzvah. It's not just enough to designate the 5 coins that will be given to the kayin, but it has to actually reach to the hands of the kayin, and only then is the pidyon enacted. But he has no obligation. It's just that it's a condition or part of how the mitzvah is fulfilled. Now, however, b'nikeya lavi ben hapoide shel benoya nifta, the other 2 participants, the father and the son, yeshloima b'bei zefanim. This could be interpreted in one of 2 ways. Aleph, either we could say mitzvahs hapidiyah hi ala ben. The mitzvah of this pidyon haben, who does it really lie upon? On the b'chayr himself, on the son himself. Since he can't redeem himself at that age, when he's 30 days old, when the mitzvah takes effect. So the Torah places the mitzvah upon the father, and he has to take his son's place, and he fulfills the mitzvah for him. So really it's the son's mitzvah. But at that time, when the mitzvah takes effect, the father fulfills the mitzvah for his son. Or we can say, no. The mitzvah is originally given for the father. It's not a mitzvah of the son, which is now the father's obligation to fulfill for him. No, this is the father's mitzvah, to perform this mitzvah for his child, or in his child, by redeeming him. Mitzvah sapidin, mitzvah sav. This is the father's mitzvah, to redeem his son. It's not the mitzvah of the child at all. In the Oster, the Rabbi points out, you have a similar shaila regarding Fris Mila, regarding other things, regarding Limudat Torah, and so on. But here we're focusing on Pidyon HaBen. Whose mitzvah is this? Is it the B'chayr's mitzvah, the Ben's mitzvah? The father's fulfilling it in his place at that time when he can't do it himself? Or is it originally the father's mitzvah? It's the father's mitzvah to redeem his son. So the difference between these 2 oifanim is, if the father did not redeem his son until the son becomes older. So at this point, upon who does it lie to redeem him? If we'll follow the first way, the obligation is on the son himself, on the b'chayr. At this point, he's older. He's already fit and he's obligated as to redeem himself. So so now the obligation and the privilege of the father to redeem his son is removed. He only had it because technically his son could not do the redemption, so the Torah made him the shliach for his son. But once the son is mature enough and he's able to redeem himself, so then the chiyuv of the father is removed. However, if we'll say the obligation here is upon the father, so that obligation that the father has, which is his, it's originally his, so even after the son becomes older, so that obligation remains upon the father. It's still his obligation, it's still his mitzvah. However, in addition to the father having that obligation, if the father doesn't redeem him, so then the son has to redeem himself as well. But the obligation of the father doesn't go anywhere. There's no reason that it should change or move. That's l'chatchila his mitzvah, so his mitzvah remains. So this is the two basic interpretations and understanding. Who is the one that has the obligation of the mitzvah of Pidyon Haben? This explains the difference between the Bavli and the Yerushalmi in the source of this halacha and the pasuk that when the son is older, he has to redeem himself. The sugi is Yerushalmi, according to the Yerushalmi, shegam din zeh shemlei padayav if chayav liv des atzmai, that this halacha, that if the father does not redeem him, he has to redeem himself. Nilmad hu meyoisei apasik v'chol b'choy adam b'vanecha tivda shemi menu lemeid nisha'av chayav liv des benoi. It's learned out from the very same pasuk that we learn out that he has to that the father has to redeem him. So from there we also learn out that he has to redeem himself. Hainu meaning shebereishis mekodesh al mitzvahs pidyon haben b'kosav nichlalu beis achiyuvim shalav v'haben ke'echad. In the very same pasuk, the obligation of a father to redeem the son, and the obligation of the son to redeem himself, it's all in the same pasuk. So mistaver, it's logical to say what this shows is shah mitzvah be'ikra hi chayvas haben, that this mitzvah is really the obligation of the son. And it's from the son that has the obligation to be redeemed. And he can't, so from this comes the obligation of the father. Since he has to be redeemed when he's still young, 30 days old. So he can't redeem himself. So the Torah is saying that the father should take the place of the son. The point is that it's all learned out from the same pasuk. If it's learned from the same pasuk, so it's really one chiyuv. It's one chiyuv that the son has to redeem himself. At the age that he can't do it, so the father is appointed or obligated to do it for him. When he can, so automatically he has to do it for himself, and then the father has no obligation anymore. That's according to the Yerushalmi. But according to the Bavli, so this halacha here, that the son has to redeem himself if the father didn't redeem him. It's learned out from a completely different pasuk. And it's only written there as a detail in a different parsha where it talks about all of the matnas kohuna. It's not learned from the same place in the parsha of Pidyon Haben, the original place where it writes the mitzvah of Pidyon Haben, where the Torah says that it lies upon the father. Two different psukim, two completely different parshas. There's the main parsha of Pidyon Haben, and then in another place as a detail in Parshas Kairach with all matnas kohuna. So mizem muchach, from this it's clear the obligation the father has to redeem the son, and the obligation that the son has, the b'chayr has to redeem himself, have nothing to do with each other. These are two different obligations. We're learning it out from an additional pasuk in a different place in the Torah. That the son could also redeem himself when he gets older. These are two different obligations. So Isemeres meaning as follows. The obligation of Pidyon Haben is the father's. It's not the father taking the place of the son. It's the father's mitzvah. When the b'chayr himself becomes older, nothing changes, nothing removes from the original obligation. The obligation of the father, his privilege to do this mitzvah, is not removed. Why should we say that his mitzvah is removed? Now the son is bar mitzvah. He's obligated in all mitzvahs. In a case where the father didn't redeem the son, and for sure if the father doesn't want to redeem the son, so now the son has an obligation to redeem himself, but they're both obligated. The father is still obligated to redeem his son, but if for whatever reason the father is not fulfilling his mitzvah, so the son has to redeem himself. It's two separate inyanim, two separate points over here. That's what the Bavli's opinion is. Okay, so we can see how the difference in the source of the drasha, it's not just a question of this pasuk or that pasuk, but it's a difference in the gather, in the definition of the obligation of a father to redeem his son. And the conclusion here is that the Bavli's opinion is that it's really the father's own obligation. And even later, when the son becomes a gadol, the father still has that obligation. There's no reason to say that it's removed. There's another pasuk in a different place saying that the son gets an obligation, but it doesn't affect the father's original obligation. So, this answers our question regarding the theme of the Masechta, Tam, Agdama, and the reason for the Gemara's introduction, that it's obvious that the father makes this bracha. Why is the Gemara giving this introduction? It's only through this introduction that we can understand the basis of our question regarding Shechayana. Why is that? So Hadiyuku, the thing to pay attention over here is as follows. Kiven the pshita. The Gemara uses the term pshita, it's obvious. What does that mean, obvious? Not only that it's obvious halacha, but also that this is obvious bali kol tnayim. There are no differences, no conditions for this, but it's always going to be the case. The father is always the one that makes the bracha, meaning gam la'acha shagadol ben, even if the ben, the b'chayr himself, is already over bar mitzvah, and he technically has his own obligation to redeem himself, but yet, if the father is redeeming him, then the father makes the bracha. It's still his mitzvah. As we have concluded before, this is based on the opinion of the Bavli, that the father always has the obligation to redeem his son, la'olam, even later, after he's a gadol already. Kolaima, meaning as follows. If the father would not be making this bracha when the son is already older, ela ben, the son would be making this bracha. At that point, it's the obligation of the ben, of the b'chayr himself. The father is taking the place of the son only when he's younger, when the son can't do it. So then, the Gemara would not have a question about who makes the shechayana. Regarding the pidyon when it's being done when the son is still a baby. Ki pshita sha'kayim mevarich. It would be obvious that the kayin would make the bracha shechayanu. Kiven sha'bracha shaloi tia alana d'matil yodei. He's making the bracha of shechayanu for a hana that he's receiving. It's his hana. He gets the 5 shkalim. The ein svar loymar shavia ben yavarcha. There'd be no place to say that the father of the son has to make this bracha. If you're going to interpret it this way, which is the way the Yerushalmi learns, that it's really the son's mitzvah. The father is only doing it for him as long as the son can't do it for himself, so then it's not the father's mitzvah. He has the obligation at this point to do the mitzvah for his son. So therefore, he doesn't have to make a bracha shechayanu on this. The kayin should make the bracha shechayanu because he himself is receiving the 5 shkalim of the pidyon haben. Val derech, similar to the halacha that we find, if you do a mitzvah as a shliach for someone else, you don't make a bracha of shechayanu. So over here, the father is a shliach for his son, so he wouldn't make the mitzvah, he wouldn't make the bracha of shechayanu to this. The Rabbi says it's al derech, it's not exactly the same thing, because here the father has an obligation. The example that Rabbi is bringing is in a case where a shliach doesn't have an obligation necessarily. But nevertheless, me'kara de dina, it's the son's mitzvah, the father is doing the son's mitzvah, and the kayin himself is the one that's receiving this money, that he gets the hana of this mitzvah. So the kayin should be the one making shechayana, there would be no question about this. But this is all if he would be following the approach of the Yerushalmi, that it's the son's mitzvah. So that's where the Gemara gives an introduction. Aval, however, Kiv and the Pshite, Sheberchasach Shekichan Mitzvah Vitzivanu Al Pidyon Haben. Avi Haben Mevarach La'ilam. This bracha is always the bracha that the father makes. Shemizem Mochach the Pidyon Haben Mitzvah Shala Avi. So from this it's clear that it's really, even when the son is a katan, it's always the father's mitzvah, it remains the father's mitzvah. So in Kemi Boilan, therefore we have the question. Who should make the bracha of Shechayanu? The father of the Kayin. Since they're both equal, seemingly they're equal. The Ka'avid mitzvah. Should the father make the bracha? He's the one that's performing a mitzvah. It's his mitzvah. It's him that the Eibusha gave the schus of this mitzvah that comes from time to time. So he has to make a shechayanu. Or sha'kayin yivarech. Is it the kind that makes the bracha? Kivin the mati hana leyadei. Because the hana is coming to the kayin, he's receiving the 5 coins. A joy of something that comes to a person, especially a joy like this, so you have to make a bracha for this. So there's a reason for both. It's the father's mitzvah, so there's a reason he should make the bracha, and there's a reason the kohen should make the bracha shechayanu, because he's getting the hana of the money of the mitzvah that brings him a simcha. That's the basis of the question. So we could only have this question according to the Bavli's opinion, that it really is the father's mitzvah. So now in the parentheses here, the Rebbe Pavaran's a question. Now if this is the point there, that there's a reason for the father to make the shechayanu, and there's a reason for the kohen to make shechayanu, so can you varchu shneim shechayanu? Why do we mind to have both of them make the bracha of shechayanu? Avia ben ala nesina mitzad schus ha-mitzvah. The father makes the bracha for the schus of the mitzvah. Ha-kohen ala kabbalah, and the kohen for receiving the money. Mishum demati hana liyadei. He gets the hana of this money. So the Rebbe explains, no, that's not an option. Yeshloimar, we can explain as follows. Meyacha shenaktinon. Deim mevarchen shechayanu al kol hana haba le'adam ela rak b'hana az dava choshev u'miyuchad. You don't make a bracha shechayanu on any hana that you get. It has to be something that's important, that's unique. Shalachem mevarchen rak in kana bayis chadash, beged chadash v'chulu, a new house, a new garment, and so on, and similar. So lachem benidin didam. So over here as well. Ein ala kain levarech shechayanu mitzad hanasa b'kabbalah seislam b'vad. The kohen is not making the bracha of shechayanu for receiving some money, for receiving just 5 sloim. That's not what the bracha is. Elam bishom shana zu ba'aloi mitzvahs pidyon haben. It's the bracha of the hana of the 5 sloim that are pidyon haben money. The mitzvah of pidyon haben, that is, we having the schus to receive this money because of the pidyon haben. V'ha mitzvah, and it's the fact that it's money of a mitzvah. Even though it's the father's mitzvah, that's what gives this hana of this money a special chshivus, a special importance, or a special level that you would make a bracha on this hana that's not just any kind of hana. Now if so, if the father is the one that makes the bracha shechayanu, that we're suggesting that let them both make the bracha. But once the father makes the bracha of shechayanu, and he's making the bracha on the very mitzvah itself that he is fulfilling, ein makim la'kayin levarech shechayanu b'kesher im hatafel sheba la'achshav ala'ana. There's no room for the kayin now to come along and also make a bracha of shechayanu, only in connection to the fact that he's getting the money which got its chshivus from the mitzvah. On the very mitzvah itself, the father already made a bracha. So the kayin now that would make the bracha, that would be tafel. That's secondary to the main mitzvah that the bracha of shechayanu was already made. So therefore, you can't make the bracha now. Then can't eina bracha ela ala levad. At this point, if the kayin would be making the bracha, his bracha would only be just on the money, on the bracha aspect, on the very mitzvah itself, on the mitzvah aspect that is of this money. Now that already the father made the bracha. So therefore, the kayin cannot now make a bracha shechayanu on a secondary aspect of this mitzvah, that it gives a chashivas to the money. So therefore, the Gemara's question, however, is, should I say that the father makes the bracha because it's his mitzvah, or no, only the kohen makes the bracha because of the money that he gets, which has a chashivas because of the mitzvah, and he's getting a hana, and it's a special hana. That's the Gemara's question. But it's not an option that they should both make a bracha of shechayanu. So with this, we could also understand the lashon that the Gemara says. After this question was asked in the Beis Medrash, they told him, the father makes both brachas. V'loidayim livshat esabayi lavado. They didn't just answer regarding Shechiyanu. Shavia ben mevarach Shechiyanu. Lahadgish, the hatam echadu b'shtein. That it's the same reason for both of them. The fact that the father makes Pidyon Haben, the fact that the father makes Shechiyanu, it's the same reason for both of them. She'ikir mitzvahs Pidyon Haben delay he. The mitzvah of Pidyon Haben is his mitzvah. V'loi sheba b'mokim haben. The father is not taking the place of the son. He makes the bracha even when the son is a gadol and the son could do the mitzvah himself. Yet, if the father is doing the mitzvah for the son, the father makes the bracha. That's regarding bracha Pidyon Haben. And the same thing also regarding Shechiyanu. The pshat and the answer is Ikir birches Shechiyanu dileihi. What we're saying here is Shechiyanu belongs to the father. Just like the bracha al Pidyon Haben belongs to the father, Shechiyanu belongs to the father as well. Therefore he makes the bracha after Mati Anah L'dei Kayin, although the Kayin receives Anah as well. So there's a reason to say that the Kayin should make the bracha, but nevertheless, no. What we're saying is that the father makes the bracha. Just like we're saying regarding the bracha of al Pidyon Haben. There's a reason for the son to make it, because he's obligated as well, but now that the father is doing the mitzvah, he makes the bracha. Same with Shechiyanu. There is a reason for the Kayin to make it, but nevertheless, the reason for the father to make it is the stronger reason, so we give it to the father, the bracha of Shechiyanu. So, the Rebbe clarifies here further, not to explain how else would I interpret the Gemara's conclusion that the father makes the Shechiyanu and not the Kayin. If the Gemara would simply say, Aviyav ben mevarach Shechiyanu, that the father of the son makes the bracha Shechiyanu, I would not know what the basis for this is. Then I would think to say, maybe I would say the reason is because really the hana of the kayin is not significant enough. In other words, the reason is not because the father has more of a reason to make the shechiyana than the kayin, but rather there is not enough of a reason for the kayin to make the shechiyana. The level of hana that he receives is not enough. That would be the reason. As we pointed out before, you don't make a bracha of Shechiyanu unless it's something significant, like a new house. A Kayin doesn't make a bracha of Shechiyanu on all of the different matnas kohana that he receives. So if the Gemara would simply say that the father makes a Shechiyanu, I would just think that the Gemara is saying that the hana of the Kayin is not significant enough. So therefore the Gemara says, no. The hana of the Kayin is significant. However, the father's mitzvah is more powerful, and therefore the father makes the bracha just like it is with the bracha of al Pidyon Haben. So that clarifies the basis of why we're saying that the father makes the bracha of Shechiyanu. In Order 37, the Rebbe has a beautiful nafkamina regarding a suffix b'chayr. There would be a nafkamina between these two ways of explaining why the father makes the bracha of Shechiyanu. You can take a look in Order 37. Okay, so this explains both the introduction of the Gemara, why it began with the Pshita. The Gemara had to give that introduction that the Pidyon Haben is really the father's mitzvah. And also in the answer, when it says Shtayim, it's to clarify exactly what's the pshat in the response that the father makes the bracha of Shechiyanu. That it is similar to the fact that the father makes the bracha of Al Pidyon Haben. So now the Rebbe comes back to explain the connection to Masechta Psachim. First the Rebbe will explain it in general, and then in connection to what we're learning here in the Sikha, the Rebbe will explain another detail that we can see here in the connection. Connection to the Masechta. The Torah, when it writes the mitzvah of Pidyon Haben, where's the mitzvah brought? It's brought in continuation of the reason and the cause of the mitzvah after it speaks about Yitzias Mitzrayim. As the pasuk says, and then v'hitzalos b'nei b'chayr Yisrael, they wish to save the b'chayrim of the Yidden. Every father has to redeem his b'chayr. That's the way it's brought in the Chumash. So the same is also with the Masechta of Psachim. What is the name Psachim? What is the name Psachim or Pesach? Asher Pasach al Bate b'nei Yisrael b'Mitzrayim. The fact that Eibishter jumped over the Jewish houses Benokvais Mitzrayim b'Makas B'chayris, at the time of Makas B'chayris, Best B'chayris Batenu Hitzel, and Hashem saved us in our homes. So, Harehu Hu Atam L'Mitzvahs Pidyon Haben. This is the reason for the mitzvah of Pidyon Haben. U'Lachein Harehi HaMesuva V'Asim Shem Masechta Psachim. So therefore, Pidyon Haben is brought at the conclusion of the Masechta of Masechta Psachim. U'B'Shayches Siyim Zeh L'Masechta Psachim, in the connection to the Masechta. So now we can see a connection here also in what we explained before regarding this, that the father is the one that makes Shechiyanu. Kiven Sha'atzalas B'ni B'chayri Yisrael. Who is the one that saves the Yidden, the B'chayrim? Sibas HaTzivah, this is the whole reason for the mitzvah. It's the Eibishter. The Eibishter takes us out of Mitzrayim. Kadosh Baruch Hu ba'atzmai pada b'nai b'chayrei me'eretz Mitzrayim. The Eibishter himself comes to redeem the Yidden. So mizeh move on, shegam ba'amesuvah b'mitzvahs pidyon haben, ha-mitzvah hi ala av liftois b'nai b'chayrei. So therefore, when it comes out in the mitzvah as well, this mitzvah is unique in the sense that although the whole mitzvah is with the b'chayr, to redeem the b'chayr, but yet, according to the Bavli's opinion, whose mitzvah is it? It's the father's mitzvah. And even when the b'chayr becomes a gadol, it remains the father's mitzvah. Why is it that way? Because that's the reason and the source of the mitzvah, the way it was by Yitzias Mitzrayim, that the Eibishter redeems Yidden from Mitzrayim. So it's the same with the mitzvah of Pidyon Haben. So that's the connection to the Masechta of Psachim and the similarity to the way it is by Yitzias Mitzrayim. Okay, this is the conclusion of the Nigla part of the Sikha. So now we come to the section of the Sikha where the Rebbe will discuss the whole Siyam al Pichsidis, and there's a beautiful, beautiful pshat that the Rebbe here will explain, the mitzvah of Pidyon Haben, regarding redeeming the Yidden, the father, the Eibishter, redeeming the Yidden from Galus. Al Pi Kol Anal, based on all of this, Yesh Levayer Es Asim, the Masechta Psachim B'Pnimi Yis Anyanim, we could explain this on a deeper level. Asiyum v'Ashleimos da Pidyon Shal B'ni B'Chayri Yisrael. The Eibishter redeeming his firstborn children, the Yidden, from this galus that we're in right now. All mitzvahs that the Eibishter gives to the Yidden, who the Eibishter fulfills himself. Definitely the Eibishter will fulfill the mitzvah of Pidyon Haben, of redeeming us from galus. The Rebbe points to a medrash where it relates the mitzvah of Pidyon Haben to the Eibishter redeeming the Yidden. So the Rabbi begins with the name of the Amayra here, that is the one that brought up the question, or the question was brought up to him. The beginning of the last section of the Masechta is Rab Simlai. Who's the one that this question was asked to Rab Simlai. So the Rabbi first brings to us another Gemara where Rab Simlai says an important statement regarding davening. He's the one that said, and says the Psak Halacha, a person should always first arrange and speak the praise of Hashem, and then he should ask for what he needs. Now, when you praise the Eibishter, there are two main details: what's revealed to us and what's concealed. We can see this in the nusach of every single bracha. Baruch Ata, so Ata means direct, that's what's revealed, and Asher Ketshana, then we say the Eibishter has sanctified us. Ata is l'noichach, when you speak to someone directly, that's benigla, that's what it's revealed, or in the language of Chassidus, memal kalam, and say the shtalshalus, and then the Ketshanu is benister. Ketshanu is a holiness of the Eibishter that he has sanctified us, which comes from a concealed place. Soiv Kalalman, Lamayla Mishtalshalus. That's praising the Eibishter as far as his existence, that's totally above the system of creation. So those are the two things that are included in praise. Nigla and Ister, Mamala and Soiv. Praising the Eibishter has to be a few times a day. Regarding the main thing that we do, which is La'avas Avay Lekechem, regarding davening. Whenever we daven, first we praise the Eibishter, Baruch Atah Hashem, and then only afterwards do we go on to the things in Shemona Esrei that we ask for our own needs. So we'll move on, since this is something which Rab Simlai said, and this is something that we do every day, a few times a day, that when Rab Simlai was discussing, or there was a matter that the Gemara brings up regarding Rab Simlai on this subject, so he was discussing the two levels of praise of the Eibishter, the level of praise in Nigla and the level of praise in Nister, as the Rebbe will explain. Therefore, Kasha Ikla Lepidyon Aben, when he attended a Pidyon Aben, Ikla Liyode Gamken Shakal Vitaria Shayach Gam Lenidin Zeh. So he comes also to a discussion that's related to the two levels of praise. Dugmas Pidyon Aben, the Uvdush B'Shas. So, like in this story, the Pidyon Aben, the story that the Gemara brings, B'Negei Lepidyon B'ni B'Chayri Yisrael. The discussion that he has here is really also a discussion regarding redeeming the Yidden, the B'ni B'Chayri Yisrael. Pidyon, Klaus B'nei Yisrael, B'Deiseinu Eile, Shem Ikvis the Mashiach, redeeming Yidden in our generation, where at the time of Ikvis the Mashiach, as it's clear from the conclusion of Masechta Saita, Hazman the Ikla Pidyon Aben. We're living now in this time period of Pidyon Aben, where the Eibush is about to come and reveal his children. So this is really what Rab Simlai is discussing. How is the Geula going to come about? How is this Pidyon Aben from the Eibush that comes to redeem the Yidden going to happen? And he continues in the Siyum of the Masechta, the Siyum of the Galus, really discussing this time of the Siyum of the Galus, and he says, that bracha the Avia Ben says, and the Rebbe will here explain beautifully the relevance of these two brachas as it relates to the Eibush redeeming Yidden from Galus. The difference in the two personalities, Av and Kayin, when it comes in relation to the Eibishter, is as follows. Av is an expression that relates to the Eibishter that's above Ishtalshalos. Kiyudua, the Av, B'chinas Chachma. Av, as the Alter Rebbe says in Tanya, refers to Chachma. Shu'inyan al-payim shana kodma Torah la'ilam. This refers to the fact that Torah preceded the world. B'chinas Lefcha Chachma, which is also hinted in the expression of Lefcha Chachma, I teach you wisdom. Chachma refers to the existence of the Eibush that's higher, above, removed of the world. So this refers to the praise, B'nister, that the Rebbe mentioned before. That's the level of Av. Kayin, Shu Ish HaChesed, U'madregis Ha'er Sheba B'Ishtalshalos. Kayin refers to the level that comes into Ishtalshalos. Chesed is kindness, giving, sharing, where there's an other that exists that you relate and communicate and give to someone else. That's Kayin. So, so now, the Gemara begins and says, it's obvious, Pidyon Aben, Avia Ben Mevarech. What does this mean? Bracha is Meloshen Hamshacha. Bracha means to draw down. The Hamshacha is Hagula Atzma, Tiyeh, Mepchenes Av, Shalamayla, Meseder Ishtalshalos. The very Geula itself, where does it come from? It comes and it'll be drawn down from a place of Av, from the Father, from a place which is totally removed of Ishtalshalos. Just like it was the first time. The Eibishter himself comes and redeems the Yidden. If you wanted to look and scrutinize and see the level Yidden are on, you would conclude and say that the Yidden are not worthy to be redeemed. But yet, none of that mattered, because the source of the Geula is from the Eibishter himself. It's beyond all of those calculations. So how much more so is this true? Now being redeemed from our Golos, the Dava Pashatu, it's obvious, our Father in heaven, the Eibishter himself comes, that's Pashat. That's the source of the Geula. However, what's the question? The bracha of Shechiyanu v'kimanu v'giyanu lizmanazeh, and then Rebbe emphasizes Zman, drawing down the Geula into the framework of time. Hainu, meaning loy b'mekayra v'sharsha shalam shachas etzem haGeula. So here we're not anymore discussing the source of where the Geula comes from. Ela ba'ifim v'eichos hamshachasa b'zman ha'makim lamata. How it comes down here below. So here the question is, Mi Mavarach, who makes this bracha? Kayin, the Mati Anali Adei, is it the Kayin that receives the Hana, or Yavia Ben Mavarach the Kavod Mitzvah, or the father of the son that does the mitzvah? And the Rebbe will explain these two reasons as it relates to the Eibishter. Kayin Mavarach. So one side of this question is that it's the Kayin. What does this mean? Yes, the source of the gula comes from a very high place, but drawing it down into the world comes through chesed, which is the kain. So he said, "Meres imayayis shashar shomil ma'alim seder shtalshus." Because hamshachasa bisman hazeh, bringing down the gula here into this world, tia al yedei midas chesed b'derech seder shtalshus. It will manifest in the world through seder shtalshus, through chesed. And the reason the Gemara gives for this, the kamati anali yadei. This is the hana that he, the kain, receives, which refers here to the Eibishter, meaning sharei shchinte begalusa. The shchin is also in galus, which is madreges elakos memala kalamen. Shchina refers to memala kalamen. Shehi kaviyachol begalus. Memala kalamen experiences kaviyachol the galus together with Yidden. Kamayim Razal, as the Medrash says, galu le'edaim shchini imaim. Yidden are in galus, the Eibishter is with them. Uba gula nema v'shava v'aylakecha es shvuscha, the Eibishter returns himself. V'heishik lo nema ela v'shav malamet shakadosh baruch hu shav imayin mati anali adei. This is the hana, meaning that level of shchina that's here enclosed in the world. That's the level that's getting redeemed together with the Yidden. Alekechem kayin. It's the Eibishter that's the kayin that's being redeemed along with Yidden. So this is the chesed that draws it down into the framework of Seder Shtal Shalos, and that the Shechina, which is Mamal Kalam, together with the Yidden, should be redeemed. Gam Yishleimer, another point here is, in Yona Shel HaGeula Hu Gam Hana. The whole, one of the things of the Geula is also the fact that it's a Hana, betur schar. It's a reward, it's a payment. The Mati Al Yidei Geulasan Shel B'nei Yisrael. That comes, that this schar comes to Yidden through redeeming them. Ulchein Efsher Shagula Taver Derech Levushi Ateva V'chulu. So therefore it's possible that the Geula will come through the garments of nature, even though the Geula is going to come from a very high place. However, has to come to the recipient, to the Yidden, that they should be able to benefit from this reward. The Mati Ana, Yeshna Ana Sagola. Over here, the Mati Ana is that the Yidden can benefit from this Geula. That's one approach. So therefore it's the Kayin that we relate the bracha of Shechion L'Zman. In other words, the bringing down the Geula into the world, into time, is connected to the Kayin, which is the Hamshacha and Chesed and Shtalshalus. Omnam Yedach, on the other hand, Svara, there's a Svara to say, Sha'aviyah ben Mevarech, that it's the father of the son that makes the bracha, which means Shagam Hamshachasa Pulasa Shalagula Bizman Nazeh Tiyali De'av Avinu Shebashamayim. Even bringing down the Geula into the world, not only the source of the Geula, but even drawing it down into the world, also comes from our Father in heaven, from a very high place, from the Eibishter himself. And Vatam, and the reason is the Ka'ovid mitzvah, because of the mitzvah. And the Rebbe explains what this means regarding the Eibishter. The idea of the Geula is not just the hana, the benefit that the recipient gets from this, that the Yidden receive this revelation of the Geula in this world. Not only the very redemption itself, the source from where it comes from, but also the revelation of it is part and parcel of what the Geula is about. It's part of the Eibishter's mitzvah. In other words, it's not just for us, but part of the very source of the Geula is the revelation of the Geula is also relevant for the Geula itself, which is a subject that the Rebbe explains in another Sikha, as it's explained in and as it's pointed to in Oster 63. So even the Gilui of the Geula is part of the very Geula itself that comes from a very high place. So it's the Eibishter himself, not only the source of the Geula, but the Hamshach of the Geula into time also comes from Av, from the Eibishter himself. It's his mitzvah. It's a chelek of the shleimus of the Eibishter's Geula that he brings to the world. That's the question of the Gemara. And the Gemara gives the answer, that the father makes both brachas. The redeeming the Yidden is the Eibishter's mitzvah, our Father in heaven. Just like the source and the beginning of where the Gula comes from is from a very high place. Bringing it down into the world will also be through our Father, which means it will not pass through and get affected by the laws of nature. It will all happen in one moment, with kindness and with mercy, and it'll come down and be experienced even in the physical pleasure of even the physical body. Every aspect of the Geula, from the beginning and its entire Amshacha to the lowest end of the Amshacha, it's all Aviyah Ben. It's all the Eibishter's doing. It's the Eibishter himself bringing this down in this way. This is also hinted in the connection of the Masechta. In addition to what we said before, that it's the Eibishter that redeems Yidden, there's also a hint here that's relevant for the Gula Asida, which is Shepesach, Hukam Lashon Chas. The Eibishter has mercy. Chas HaKadosh Baruch Hu Alon, Shezeu Lashon Targum. V'chein Targum Unkelis Al Pasuk Upasachti Ve'eichos. I have mercy. Pasach Havaya Ve'yochos Havaya. V'ayne Shapdir Shal Benoi B'choyre. That redeeming the Yidden, Tumshach Gam B'Targum. It comes down and it will be revealed even in a translation, which means B'Lashon U'Levushei Olam, in the language and in the garments of the world. And B'Yoifen Shal Rachamim Rabim V'Chemla Gedayla. Not just the source of the Geula, but even the way it manifests in this world will also come down directly like a father that's giving something to a child, and it will not have to go through any of the hardships that the laws of nature would present to this, but it'll go in a very merciful and kind way, like a father. This answer was given in the Beis Medrash, in the place where it's the 4 Amos of learning Torah, but then the Gemara concludes and repeats it again, that the halach is that the father makes both brachas, meaning halacha hints to the fact that it's brought down also into halacha, which is learned out from halichas olam, bringing it into the ways of the world. Which means the very redemption of Yidden. And also the way it's going to enter into this world, into the lowest place of the world, will also happen directly from the Eibishter, not be affected by Ishtalshalos at all. Like a jump. That's an additional translation of the word of Pasach, that the Eibishter jumps. It'll all come in a way that it'll not at all pay attention to this whole Teva. Open and revealed good, Mekarev Mamesh, speedily in our days.